She was 56 years old, and she had $2,847 left in a checking account that had once held the savings of a 31-year marriage. No pension. No career to return to after stepping away to raise 3 children who were now scattered across 3 different states and called on birthdays when they remembered. A 2007 Honda Accord with a cracked dashboard and 178,000 miles. A storage unit in Tulsa with furniture she couldn't afford to move and couldn't bring herself to sell. And a notice from the apartment complex that her lease would not be renewed because the building was converting to condominiums, and she had 60 days to find somewhere else to go. That was the sum of what Cecelia Hargrove had left at 56. And the strange thing, the thing she would not understand until much later, was that all of it, the marriage ending, the apartment, the 60 days, every last hard and humiliating piece of it, was leading her somewhere she had been trying to get back to for 30 years without knowing it. If you've ever felt like your life was being taken apart piece by piece, stay with us. Because what Cecelia found at the end of a gravel road in the Ozark Mountains is going to stay with you for a long time. Welcome to Grand Stories. Hit subscribe before we begin, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. We love knowing how far these stories reach. Cecelia Ann Hargrove, née Pruitt, had grown up in a town called Delwood, Missouri, a place of 600 people tucked into the limestone hills of the eastern Ozarks. Her father had been a rural mail carrier who knew every family on 3 county routes by name, and stopped his truck to help when he saw a tractor broken down in a field, even in December, even if it made him an hour late. Her mother had canned peaches and green beans every August in a kitchen that smelled of steam and vinegar, and had served on the school board for 11 years without once being thanked for it. Which she said was fine. Cecelia had been a serious child, careful with words, careful with feelings. She had won a state essay competition at 14 and had a teacher who told her she would write something real one day, something that mattered, and Cecelia had believed her with the whole open heart of a 14-year-old who had not yet learned to stop believing things. She went to the University of Missouri on a partial scholarship, studied journalism, fell in love with a man named Douglas Hargrove in her junior year, a civil engineering student from Kansas City, steady and certain and kind in the way that young men sometimes are, before life teaches them the limits of their kindness. They married when Cecelia was 24. She had been offered a staff writing position at a regional magazine in St. Louis. She turned it down because they were moving to Tulsa for Douglas's first real job. And Tulsa didn't have an opening. And then she was pregnant with their first. And then the second came. 2 years later, and then the third. And she told herself that she would write when the children were older. When the days were a little less full, when she had 5 minutes together to think. 31 years passed. She did not write anything that mattered. She volunteered at the school library for 8 years. She organized the neighborhood association's annual block party for 6 consecutive summers. She made very good soup. She loved her children with a fierceness that surprised even her sometimes, and she raised them into people she genuinely liked, which she considered her best work, and which nobody ever thought to call a career. Douglas told her about the divorce on a Saturday morning in March. He was standing at the kitchen counter drinking coffee. He said he had not been happy for a long time. He said there was someone at work, a woman named Christine, 38, a project manager who had started 14 months ago. He was sorry. He wanted to be honest. He had made up his mind. Cecelia set down the dish towel she was holding. She looked at him for a moment the way you look at a piece of furniture you've lived with. So long you stopped seeing it. And then you move it, and there's a clean patch of wall where it used to be. And you realize the wall has been there all along. She said, okay, just that, okay. The children were upset in different ways. Her eldest daughter called Douglas and cried. Her middle son said nothing for 3 weeks and then sent a very long text message. Her youngest, who was 22 and living in Portland, said, "Mom, honestly? You deserve better." None of them knew quite what to do with a mother who didn't fall apart. The truth was that Cecelia had been holding herself together. For so long she had forgotten it. There was supposed to be something inside the holding. The settlement was what it was. The house had appreciated considerably, and the equity split gave her something but attorney fees, and the cost of the storage unit and 60 days of looking for an apartment in a city where rents had climbed into absurdity, ate through it faster than she had imagined possible. By the time she found herself standing in the parking lot of a Tulsa apartment complex holding a non-renewal notice in both hands, She had $2,847 and a Honda with a cracked dashboard and no very clear idea of what came next. She stood there for a long time. Then she thought about Delwood. Her parents had both been gone for years. The house she grew up in had been sold when her father died. But her mother's older sister, her great-aunt Vera, had left behind a small house on the eastern edge of Delwood when she passed in 2019, and through some combination of family inertia and probate delay and nobody wanting to deal with it, that house had ended up in Cecilia's name. She had been paying the property taxes by automatic transfer and had not set foot in Missouri in 7 years. She called her daughter. She said she was going back to Delwood for a while. Her daughter said, "Mom, there's nothing in Delwood." Cecelia said she knew. She loaded the Honda with what mattered: the books, the winter coat, her grandmother's quilt, the box of her children's school photographs. She could not bring herself to leave in a storage unit. She drove northeast out of Tulsa on a Tuesday morning in early April with the windows cracked and the radio on low. She had not been back to the Ozarks in a long time. She had forgotten how the land changes when you cross into it from the flat plain, the way the ground begins to lift and fold, the limestone ridges showing through the hillsides like old bones, the cedar trees dark against the pale April sky. The light different here, slower somehow. She rolled down the window all the way and let it come in. Delwood had changed and had not changed. The diner on Main Street was a yoga studio now. The hardware store was gone. But the grain elevator was still there, and the water tower still had the town's name painted on it, in letters that needed repainting, and the Baptist church on Sycamore Hill still had a hand-lettered sign out front that read, "Worry is a misuse of imagination." Her father used to read that sign aloud every time they drove past. He had said it was the best piece of theology he'd ever encountered and they should put it in the Bible. Aunt Vera's house was smaller than Cecelia remembered. The porch sagged in the middle. The kitchen wallpaper, a pattern of yellow roosters, had been there since 1974 and showed no signs of leaving, but the structure was sound and the well still worked. And there were 3 cords of dry firewood stacked against the side of the house, because Vera had believed in being prepared for winter up until the last winter she didn't see coming. Cecelia slept for 12 hours the first night. Then she woke up and made coffee and sat on the sagging porch in the April morning and listened to the woodpeckers in the tree line and felt, for the first time in months, that she was somewhere real. She spent 3 weeks in a kind of stillness she had not known since childhood. She walked the gravel roads in the mornings. She reread the books she had loved at 20. She let the days be slow. But she understood by the end of April that she could not live on stillness. The $2,847 was becoming $200 was becoming less. She needed something. The county library was not hiring. The school district had a substitute list, but it was closed. The hardware store that might have needed someone no longer existed. She drove the roads and thought and did not find an answer. One morning in early May, she walked farther than usual, following a limestone ridge road she didn't quite remember, and she came around a bend into a small clearing where a white clapboard building sat back from the road, under 2 old sycamore trees. It was perhaps 40 feet long. The tin roof had rusted to a deep orange. The front door hung at an angle. There were 4 windows, 2 on each side, 3 of them still intact. Above the door, barely legible in weathered black paint, were the words, "Pruitt County Free Library, Est, 1931. Cecelia stood at the edge of the clearing for a long time. She had been to this building once, she realized. A very long time ago. She must have been 8 or 9. Her great-aunt Vera had brought her here on a summer afternoon in. It must have been 1977 or 1978, and there had been a woman inside behind a wooden desk who had let Cecelia choose any 3 books she wanted to take home. She had chosen a book about horses, a book about the ocean, and a book about a girl who ran away to live in a museum in New York City. She had read all 3 in 4 days. She had completely forgotten about this place. She drove to the county assessor's office in the next town over. A clerk named Howard, a deliberate man in his 60s who wore his reading glasses on a cord around his neck and seemed to distrust haste of any kind, pulled up the records on a computer that sounded like it was running on determination, alone. Pruitt County Free Library. Operated privately from 1931 to 1968 under a nonprofit charter. Charter dissolved. Building transferred to county in 1971. Assessed as surplus property. Listed for sale or demolition on 6 separate occasions. Current status. Available. Asking price. $300. $300, Cecelia said. Howard looked at her over his glasses. Nobody's wanted it in 50 years. County nearly knocked it down in '09, but there was a budget freeze. What would I need to do to buy it? Howard considered her for a moment. You have $300 and a check? She did. She drove back to that limestone ridge road in the late afternoon with a stamped receipt, a deed, in progress, and a key that Howard had found in an envelope in the back of a filing cabinet, marked "Do Not Disc" in handwriting from what appeared to be the Eisenhower administration. The key was old, the lock was older, and it took her 5 full minutes of persuasion to get the door open. But it opened, and she stepped inside. The air was cool and still, and smelled of paper and old wood, and the particular quiet that belongs to places where people once came to be serious about something. Afternoon light came through the 3 good windows and fell in long bars across the plank floor. There were shelves along every wall, floor to ceiling, still holding books, hundreds of them, maybe 1,000. Dust-covered, spines faded, still standing in their rows as if waiting for something. There was a wooden card catalog cabinet against the east wall, the kind with small brass-handled drawers, 48 of them, that Cecelia had last seen in a library when she was a child. There was a reading table in the center of the room, solid oak, 6 chairs around it. There was a cast-iron wood stove in the corner, and above it hung on a nail, a framed needlepoint that read, "A reader lives 1,000 lives. The man who never reads lives only one." Cecelia walked to the shelves and pulled out a book at random. Willa Cather, My Antonia. The library card was still tucked in the pocket inside the back cover. She opened it. The last due date stamped was March 14, 1968. She put the book back carefully. She walked the length of the room twice. Then she sat down in one of the oak chairs at the reading table and she cried for a long time. Not because she was sad. She was crying because something that had been very quiet inside her for 30 years had recognized where it was. We'll be right back to Cecelia. But if this story is reaching you right now, take a second and hit subscribe. These stories find the people who need them, and we want to keep making them. She began the next morning. She borrowed a push broom and a mop from Aunt Vera's house. She drove to the dollar store in the next town over and bought cleaning supplies and rubber gloves and 3 boxes of contractor trash bags. She came back to the library and she started at the front door and worked her way back. She did not throw away a single book. She found, after the first week of cleaning, that most of the volumes were in better condition than she had any right to expect. The roof had held. The building had been tight. The books had sat in their cool, dry rows for 55 years and waited. She made a list of every title on every shelf. She had to buy a new notebook at the dollar store halfway through, because she filled the first one. Fiction, history, agriculture, medicine, practical home medical guides from the 1940s and 50s that were startling in their directness. Children's books. A full shelf of books in German, which she could not read but recognized as old. Poetry. Travel. A complete set of the Encyclopedia Britannica from 1954. It was on the 4th day, going through the center drawer of the card catalog cabinet, that she found the first thing. A small handwritten index card, not a library card, folded in half. She opened it. The handwriting was small and careful. If you are looking for the librarian's notes, check the desk. Bottom drawer. The key is under the left foot. Cecelia looked at the reading table. She got down on her knees and tilted the left front leg, and there was a key taped to the underside, with a piece of adhesive that had gone stiff and yellow with age. She took the key to the wooden desk at the back of the room, the librarian's desk, a roll-top model with a dozen small compartments, and she tried it in the bottom drawer. It opened. Inside were 3 things. The first was a bound ledger, the kind with a marbled black and white cover, labeled in pencil on the spine. Borrowers, 1931-1968. The second was a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, perhaps 80 or 90 of them. The third was a photograph, 5 by 7, in a cardboard frame. A woman, perhaps 45, standing in front of the library building. On what appeared to be a summer day, squinting slightly into the sun, wearing an apron over her dress, and holding a book in both hands as if she had just been interrupted while reading something important. On the back of the photograph, in the same careful handwriting as the index card, Hattie, May 1952. Cecelia held the photograph for a long time. She asked at Gormley's, the Delwood equivalent being a combination feed store and general merchandise operation called Birch's, run by a man named Arvin Birch, whose family had been in Delwood since before the county had a name. She showed him the photograph. Arvin put on his glasses. He looked at it for a moment. "That's Hattie Corwin," he said. "Harriet Corwin. She ran that library from before the war until it closed. Lived alone on Persimmon Road, no family to speak of. She died not long after the library shut, 69 or 70, I think. Never married. She and that library were about the same thing as far as I can recall. He handed the photograph back. People around here were real sorry when it closed. She used to stay open until 9 o'clock on weeknights, so the farm families could come in after supper. Nobody asked her to do that. She just did it. Cecelia drove back to the library. She sat at the reading table with the ledger open in front of her, and she began to read. The borrower's ledger was not just a record of who had checked out what book. Hattie Corwin had written notes, small ones in the margins in pencil, as if she were keeping a private account of something that mattered to her. September 14, 1935. Raymond Dobbins, age 12, took Tom Sawyer. His mother says he doesn't read. He read the whole thing in 4 days. Brought it back and asked if there was more Twain. There is. February 2, 1941. Opal Gentry, age 67. First time she's been in. Said she never learned to read proper and always felt ashamed. Sat with her for an hour. She knows more letters than she thinks. We'll order her something with large print when the order comes in. June 8, 1944. 3 boys from the Bradford family took out books today before shipping out. Calvin took a history of the Roman Empire. He said if he was going to Europe, he wanted to know who'd been there before. I told him the Romans had very strong opinions and he laughed. I hope he comes home. Cecelia read until the light failed and she had to use her phone's flashlight to see the pages. She came back every evening for 2 weeks. Calvin Bradford had come home, she found, in a later entry from 1945. Calvin returned the Roman history. He said he read it twice, and the Romans were right about engineering but wrong about almost everything else. Opal Gentry had learned to read with enough fluency to finish 2 novels by 1943. Raymond Dobbins had checked out 47 books between 1935 and 1944, and then there was a gap, and then a 1946 entry. Raymond's back. He was in the Pacific. He looks older. He asked for something hopeful. I gave him Steinbeck. I'm not sure that was right, but it was what I had. The library had been Hattie Corwin's whole life. That became clear. She had been there 6 days a week, sometimes 7. She had ordered books by mail when the county gave her no budget. She had repaired bindings herself. She had made the library a place where a 12-year-old who didn't read, and a 67-year-old who couldn't read, and 3 farm boys about to go to war could all find something they needed. Then Cecelia opened the letters. They were not to Hattie. They were from people who had borrowed books, written after the library closed. Most of them were addressed simply to the old library, Delwood, Missouri, had been forwarded, apparently by the post office to a box number. And then the person who had the box number had put them inside and locked the drawer and left the key under the foot of the table, and there they had stayed. Dear Miss Corwin, the first one read, I don't know if this will find you. I heard the library closed. I'm writing from Cincinnati, where I work now at a manufacturing company in the accounting department. I wanted you to know that the reason I got this job is that I could read financial statements, and the reason I could read financial statements is that you ordered me a book about accounting in 1957 when I was 14 and said it would be useful someday. You were right. Thank you. Garfield Pruitt. Dear Miss Corwin, this is Florence. Florence Meadows. You might remember me as Florence Cassell. I came to the library every Tuesday for 11 years. When my husband left in 1961 and I didn't know what to do, I came to the library and you let me sit at the reading table for 3 hours without asking me anything. You just brought me tea from the little thermos you kept under the desk. I have thought about that afternoon many times. Kindness doesn't always need words. I know you know that. I just wanted to tell you that I know it too now, Miss Corwin. I am writing from Vietnam, Quang Tri Province, August 1966. This is Thomas Gentry, Opal Gentry's grandson. You taught my grandmother to read in the 1940s, and she taught my mother, and my mother taught me. I'm reading out here when I can. I have a paperback copy of Lonesome Dove that's been through 4 guys in my unit. I keep thinking about that library and how quiet it was. Thank you for making that quiet place. It helped me more than I knew at the time. It took Cecelia 3 weeks to read every letter, 81 of them. They had come from 23 states, from a woman in Memphis who had become a school teacher, from a man in Portland who had become a botanist because of a field guide Hattie had ordered for him in 1955, from a family in Georgia who wrote that their grandmother, a woman named Opal, had died peacefully in 1971 and had asked them to write to the library to say thank you. because it was the place where she had first understood that words on a page were for her too. Hattie Corwin had spent 37 years in that building tending to one small county's relationship with the written word. She had had no family to survive her, no institution to memorialize her, no endowment in her name. The building had stood empty for 55 years with a drawer full of letters nobody had read. Cecelia sat in the library on a Sunday afternoon and looked at the shelves around her and understood that she had been brought here. Not in any mystical sense. In the very plain sense that she had nowhere else to go. And this place had a $300 price tag and a key in a filing cabinet. And sometimes that is exactly how things that are meant to happen do happen. Through necessity and luck and the willingness to drive northeast out of Tulsa, on a Tuesday morning with nowhere particular to be. That was when Gerald Price showed up. He drove a silver pickup with a construction company logo on the door, and arrived on a Wednesday morning in late June while Cecelia was repainting the front door. He was 55, tan and efficient, in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors solving problems that had right answers. He introduced himself pleasantly, said he was sorry to interrupt, and explained that his company had been retained by a regional developer to assess several small parcels in the area for a proposed resort and cabin complex targeting the heritage tourism market, which was, he said, a growing sector. Your parcel here, combined with the adjacent timber parcel, would give us the acreage we need for the eastern anchor of the project. I'm authorized to offer you $170,000. Cash. 60-day close. Cecelia set down her paintbrush. She looked at the fresh white paint on the door. She thought about the $2,200 she had left. She was 56 years old with no pension and a Honda with a cracked dashboard, and she was standing in front of a building she had bought for $300 from a county filing cabinet. $170,000. She thought about that. Do you know anything about this building? She asked. Gerald looked at his clipboard. County records show it as a former library, privately operated, closed 1968. No historic designation. A woman named Hattie Corwin ran it for 37 years, Cecelia said. She taught an elderly woman to read in 1941, and that woman taught her daughter, and her daughter taught her son, who was reading paperback novels in Vietnam in 1966. Because of it, there are 81 letters in a drawer in there, from people whose lives were changed by this place. She had no family. Nobody knew any of it. Gerald nodded with the patience of a man who had heard many things and had learned to wait them out. I understand that's meaningful to you. But 170 is a very strong offer for this property. My authority goes up to 180. I want to be straightforward with you. He handed her a card. He said she had 10 days. He got in the silver truck and drove away. Those were 10 very quiet days. Cecelia thought about the money every night. She could buy a real house. She could stop worrying. She could help her kids, who were all at ages where help mattered. She could, for the first time in her adult life, choose what came next from a position of something other than fear. She thought about what Hattie Corwin would have done. Then she thought that was a lazy question, because Hattie Corwin had already answered it. Hattie Corwin had spent 37 years choosing this building over every easier thing. That was the answer. It just wasn't necessarily Cecilia's answer. On the 7th night, she went back to the ledger. She had not read the last section carefully. The final entries, from 1967 and 1968, were written in a hand that was slightly less steady than the early entries but no less precise. March 3, 1967. Word from the county that the library charter is likely to be dissolved. No budget for next year. I have written to the county board 3 times. I do not expect a response. November 14, 1967. I have decided that if the library closes, I will leave everything as it is. The books will stay on the shelves. The door will be locked but not boarded. I am going to leave a note in the card catalog. I want whoever comes here next to know what this place was for. I do not believe a place like this stays empty forever. Cecelia read that last line again. I do not believe a place like this stays empty forever. She called Gerald Price on the morning of the 10th day. I'm not selling, she said. I'm sorry. I'm not selling. There was a pause. Miss Hargrove, he said carefully, I want to make sure you've thought this through. This is a very significant. I know, she said. Thank you for the offer. Goodbye. She sat for a moment after she hung up. Then she picked up the ledger and held it and felt the weight of 37 years in her hands and made a decision about the rest of her life. She drove to the county seat and spent 2 days in the records office. She found Hattie Corwin's original nonprofit charter and the filing that had dissolved it. She found a local attorney, a woman in her early 40s named Patricia Ossie, who had grown up one county over, and had, it turned out, a grandmother who had borrowed books from Hattie Corwin as a child, and had talked about that library until the day she died. Patricia waived her fee. They restored the charter. Cecelia filed for nonprofit status under the name, the Hattie Corwin Free Library. Arvin Birch at the feed store made the first donation. $200 in cash, the same amount he said that his grandfather had donated to build the original bookshelves in 1931. Then Cecelia wrote letters. She had the return addresses from 63 of the 81 original letters. She wrote to each one by hand, told them what she had found, told them what she was doing. 51 of the letters reached someone. 38 people wrote back. Some sent $20, some sent $500. The botanist in Portland sent $8,000 and a note that said, "I have been trying to figure out what to do with my life savings since my wife died last year. I think I just figured it out." A family in Memphis sent $3,500 in memory of their mother, the school teacher. A man in Georgia, Thomas Gentry's son, drove up from Georgia with his wife and 2 grandchildren and spent a weekend helping Cecelia reshelf and catalog the entire collection. In the first 4 months, the foundation raised $41,000. Cecelia used it to repair the roof, to rewire the building, to restore the card catalog, to build an accessible entrance ramp, to reopen. She opened the Hattie Corwin Free Library on a Saturday in October, 55 years and 6 months after it had closed. She had expected maybe 20 people. 63 came. They drove in from across the county and from neighboring counties. 3 families drove from out of state. The botanist flew in from Portland. Thomas Gentry's son was there with his wife and grandchildren. Patricia Ossie came with her mother, who was 84 years old, and had not been in Delwood in 40 years, and who stood in the doorway of the library for a long moment before she walked in. "It smells the same," the old woman said. "It smells exactly the same." They sat at the oak reading table and they talked for 4 hours. They told stories about books they had borrowed and where those books had taken them. They read aloud from the borrower's ledger. An old man who had been Calvin Bradford's younger brother stood up and told them that Calvin had rowed Mr. Hisdremy on a troop ship crossing the Atlantic and had written home to say it was the best book he'd ever read and he wished he could talk to Miss Corwin about it. Calvin had died in 1992 and had talked about that library until close to the end. Cecelia stood at the back of the room with a cup of coffee and watched it happen. 63 people in a building that Hattie Corwin had locked and left and trusted to whoever came next. She thought about her great-aunt Vera, who had brought her here when she was 8 years old. Vera had known Hattie Corwin. She must have. Delwood was small, and Vera had lived there her whole life. Had Vera brought her here on purpose? Had she known, in the way that old women sometimes know things about the futures of the girls they love, that Cecelia would need this place someday? She would never know. She thought about the essay she had won at 14. She thought about the writing she had always meant to do. She thought about 31 years of very good soup. Then she walked to the librarian's desk and opened the ledger to the first blank page she could find. And she wrote, October 12, first day open in 55 years, 63 people came. One woman said it smells the same. I believe her. This is what we are doing here. C. Hargrove. It was the first thing she had written that mattered. She did not remarry. She did not go back to Tulsa. She lived in Aunt Vera's house on the east side of Delwood, walked to the library every morning the way Hattie Corwin had, and was there 6 days a week with the door unlocked, and the wood stove going in the winter, and the windows open in the summer. She ordered books by interlibrary loan. She started a Tuesday evening reading group for adults who wanted to read something harder than they thought they could. She started a Saturday morning hour for children, where she read aloud from the books she had loved at 8 and 14 and 20, and she let every child choose one book to take home and keep. She kept the ledger going. November. A girl named Angie, age 9, took home my Antonia. She looked at it sideways. I told her to give it 100 pages. I have a feeling about her. February 17. Calvin Bradford's grandnephew came in. He's 14. He wanted to know if we had anything about Roman history. We do. Some lives only finish their meaning when somebody else takes them up. Hattie Corwin had built something and locked the door and trusted the future. Cecelia Hargrove had arrived at the door with $300 and a cracked dashboard and the ruins of a life that turned out not to have been the point. The point was the key under the foot of the table. The point was the note in the card catalog. I do not believe a place like this stays empty forever. The point was that kindness accumulates. It does not announce itself. It waits in a locked drawer in a building on a limestone ridge road for the person who needs it next, who will carry it forward in their own way for the people who need it after that. Cecelia Hargrove never did write the things she had always meant to write. But she kept the ledger, and one day someone would open it and read her notes in the margins, small and careful, just like Hattie's. And they would understand that the writing had been there all along, in the books on the shelves and the names in the card catalog, and the 81 letters in the bottom drawer, and in every child who left on a Saturday morning with a book tucked under their arm and 100 pages still to go. If this story moved you, we hope you'll subscribe to Grand Stories and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And tell us in the comments, who was the person in your life who pointed you towards something you didn't know you needed? Say their name. Leave it here. They gave you something. And this is one small way to give it back. We'll see you in the next one.